Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveller. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth.
Robert Frost was an American poet who lived from 1874 to 1963. Robert Frost was born in San Francisco, California, but moved to Massachusetts when his father died. Frost spent most of his life writing poetry. In addition to writing poetry, Frost attempted to be a farm worker, but failed when it did not work out. He spent a large portion of his life also as an English teacher and educator.
His Frost's career began at a library in Dartmouth College in 1892, I think it was. He read a poem in a small regional magazine called the New York Independent. He kind of became disenfranchised or disinterested in college life, so he left Dartmouth after one term, and he published a poem in the same magazine a year later. From there, after he left Dartmouth, he kind of worked a series of jobs being a teacher, a newspaper delivery guy, an editor at a magazine, well, more of a newspaper. He got married, he went to Harvard, and he again dropped out of Harvard. From there, he worked on a farm for 9 years, I think it was. He wrote a lot of his poems there. He wrote in the morning, but he couldn't get published anywhere in the United States, so he eventually moved to Great Britain, and he was published within a year. He published 2 books there within 2 years. Moved back to America. One of his books was published in America that was published in Britain. And from there, his career kind of took off. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner 4 times over. Aside from his literary career, he was an English teacher at Amherst College, Middlebury College, lecturer at Dartmouth, Harvard. So he was really an academic, not in the sense that he did research, but that he taught. I think the capstone of his career was he read one of his poems, The Gift Outright, at Jack Kennedy's 1961 inauguration. He died 2 years later, so that's his career and reputation.
Frost came from a middle-class family. His father was a teacher until his death. Frost's cultural and social context often is a depiction of a common man in everyday life. Frost both worked as an educator and a farmer during his life. Frost was very interested in humans' response to nature and the progression of nature. Many of Frost's poems deal with a person or object placed in a natural setting and the experience that the person or object has with nature. Much of Frost's life was humble as an educator and a working man who wrote poetry because of his genuine love for it.
So some of the themes in Robert Frost's work include the ideas of loneliness and isolation, and to a weird extent, American patriotism. He wrote about, his life in the rural Vermont area, New Hampshire area, and he wrote about the classical, I guess, American idea of exceptionalism and manifest destiny a lot. So those were some of his major themes that he wrote about a lot. And some of his concerns with the English language, I guess, or poetry particularly, was the way that words sound. So he urged his students at the colleges that he taught at to find the sound of sense. So the sound of coherent words being spoken. He urged them to look at that and use that in their writing and their poetry.
Frost's styles and forms in his poems were nothing different than many poets, but his use of monologues and dramatic scenes set him apart. Many critics have thought that Frost is too traditional or strays away from 20th century modernist poetry. Many of Frost's poems do not rhyme, but rather seem like a dramatic monologue of a common man's personal dilemma. Frost has been noted for his use of imagery, common speech, and realism. Many critics note that the difficulties in Frost's poems are what he wants the reader to take away from the poem, and not what he explicitly says. Frost's final visions in his poems have often been difficult to analyze or understand.
Yeah, so some of the connections so far between what we've looked at and now, what Kyle kind of hit on it, he talked about the relationship between nature and Frost, the way Frost drew a lot of his inspiration from, the places that he was at. So you have New England. Really, those are the main poems, I think, in his canon that people know about are his works describing nature, birches, for instance. Talks about trees, obviously, mending wall, farms. So he's intimately connected to his area. And again, that builds on those ideas of isolation and, loneliness that humans oftentimes experience, I guess. Another part that I would talk about is he kind of explored realism in a sense because he was a human being, but in the broader sense, nature or the universe doesn't really care, and so he talked about that a lot. Nature is just this kind of non-person who doesn't really care about anything. So I think those are some connections that are being made in the points that we've already made so far.
Agreed.
So I think that Frost's work is relevant today because he explores the human condition, and I don't see any signs of humans disappearing anytime soon. So I think we should stay the course and keep studying him. When I mean the human condition, I mean he explores particularly depression, again, loneliness, all these things that humans have been experiencing since, as far as we know. I think this is represented most in his poem Acquainted with the Night. He says, I have been one acquainted with the night, and haven't we all? And so it's relevant to us today. We should study him today because it helps us understand ourselves, and I think it will help, I guess, the literary forms he uses and whatnot. I think that'll help us as writers, as poets, as English studies majors. So
With that being said, he also was faced with a lot of critique from critics and even his friends. His dear friend Ezra Pound did not like the stylistic choices he used in his poems because, as I noted earlier, some are very long and monologue-y, others are very short and to the point. For example, Out Out is a long, just one stanza poem, which is 30 plus lines, where you have Fire and Ice, which is a very short poem, or you have The Road Not Taken, which is a very standard poem with 4 to 5 lines in each one. We both have our own reasons for why we think Robert Frost should be studied in English 2025, but we each kind of have our own ideas on why. One of the things I really like about Frost is he's a much more complex poet than many think. A lot of them think The Road Not Taken is just a simple poem about 2 directions one can take in life. But a lot of his poems touch on man's relationship with nature, or someone's depression, and how we react in those different kinds of situations. And I also like how his poems are not straight cookie cutter, like, they're each going to look the same, each one you read. They're each going to be a little bit different. Very long or very short, and very different in the style he chooses to write that poem in.
yeah, excellent points. One major reason why I think we should study him more in this limited, especially this class where you get like maybe a week or so on an author, is that he was very versatile in the way he formed his words. And the way he urged his students to form their words. He, again, told them to focus on the way the English language sounds when written. And so I think when you start thinking on that deeper level, you're going to be a better writer, you're going to be a better poet, and then you're going to be able to do a lot more with what you have. Again, I do like what Kyle said. He's a lot more complex than what 8th graders or whatever are reading in classrooms throughout America. So I think giving him a little bit more deeper consideration will improve everyone as a writer. So those are our thoughts on why he should be included in the class. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.
I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. and that has made all the difference.